Kate Spade, Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain. What comes to mind when you hear these names? You may have thought about their amazing careers: a coveted designer, a hilarious comedian, an acclaimed chef. But more than likely, you thought about the same thing as the person next to you: a dirty thought that society doesn't like to talk about. You thought about suicide. You thought about mental illness. Suicide rates are up 25% in recent years. Each year in America, over 44,000 people will end their lives by suicide. And for those 44,000, there will be 25 times more who will attempt it. That means each day in America, over 3,000 people will attempt to end their lives, all because living with mental illness in a world full of insane stigma is hard. Mental illness has reached epidemic levels in the United States, and yet the topic still makes us uncomfortable. In fact, let's play a little game. How many of you have ever driven a silver or a gray car? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have blue eyes? Hands up. How many of you are left-handed? Hands up. How many of you know someone struggling with mental illness? Hands up. Leave your hand up if that person struggling is you. You see, it was easy to leave your hands up and answer the mundane questions. But when I asked you to keep it up and admit to something that made you appear a little too vulnerable, you thought twice about leaving it up or maybe even brought it down. You may wonder why I asked those other questions. Well, as it turns out, mental illness is as common as silver cars on the road, more common than having blue eyes, and twice as common as being left-handed. And yet the idea and stigma around those who are living with it has become debilitating and has prevented people from getting help. It's our fault, really, the stigma that is. We created it. Hollywood perpetuated it. Every person on the silver screen who is depressed is considering suicide. Every anxiety-riddled character is so flawed that people shy away from them. And every character living with OCD is the punchline for jokes about overwashing their hands or making sure they lock the door 10 times. The truth is that mental illness looks different on everyone. And while that's the beauty of the human race, it's also what fuels the stigma. As humans, we are wired to want things in black and white. Something too colorful or in the gray zone makes us uncomfortable and not quite sure how to proceed. Women demanding equal pay rattles powerful men, leaving them worried they'll appear weak. Black Lives Matter shakes the white suburban folk who aren't exactly sure what it is they are fighting for. And the Me Too movement left some wondering what lines there were left. What could you get away with when it comes to the opposite sex? Like it or not, those very people gracing our silver screen are becoming catalysts for change in our ever more connected society. Social media inundates us every day with a perfection ideal. And while we feel we are failing to meet that standard, there are some we think are setting the bar. Those beautiful people basking in the suns of the Hollywood Hills seem to have it all figured out. But they too are living a colorful existence, having left behind black and white on the TVs of the 1950s. Those people we fawn over on TV, follow on Instagram, or try to emulate in our ordinary lives are seemingly the right kind of crazy. Instead of crazy, we call them colorful or quirky. They seem to have achieved the one thing we all covet: perfectionism, America's favorite flaw. We celebrate perfectionism in our society, even using it as our one downfall in job interviews. But the thing I've come to find out recently is that there's some truth to something a friend told me about LA, that nothing is real and everyone smokes. Those seemingly perfect people are living in the shadows of a gray existence just like you and I. They're just better actors. Adele struggles with depression. Britney Spears has bipolar. Kristen Bell lives with depression. Kevin Love admits to anxiety. Olivia Munn has OCD. Ryan Reynolds lives with anxiety. And The Rock himself, the essential epitome of strength in our society, has admitted to attempting suicide. Each year, more and more coming forward admitting their truths, me included. I am that 1 in 4 who struggles with mental illness. And it took me a while to wade through the, what do you have to be sad about, or the, I get stressed too sometimes. The nuances of mental illness make it hard for those in the normal category to understand those of us who check the other box. Being down is not the same as being depressed. And feeling anxious is not the same as living with generalized anxiety disorder. And yet, no matter how hard we try to explain it, people still struggle to accept it. You know, it took me longer than I'd like to admit to not only raise my hand when asked if I was struggling, but to admit my truth boldly. We don't shame people for having high blood pressure or heart disease. Instead, we offer them help and medication, not to mention sympathy and understanding. So why don't we do the same for those struggling with not a physical ailment, but a mental one? When I first began preparing for this talk, my question was, how many celebrities need to come forward and admit that they are struggling with mental illness before the rest of us can look each other in the eye and have an honest conversation about how we are feeling? Or bleaker yet, how many people need to die before we label suicide an epidemic? As a society, we are breeding in this next generation a stigma that needs to be shattered. We already prey on young people's insecurities by ranking them with standardized tests and social media comparisons. They already feel judged and an overwhelming need to maintain status quo. What they don't need in the midst of struggle is shame for being who they are and being imperfect. Instead, it's our job here today to teach them to find joy and imperfection in their voice, to tell others who they are and what they really need. I recently heard that a great way to live life is to turn judgment into curiosity. And when you think about it, the two go hand in hand, and it really wouldn't be that hard of a leap for us to, instead of judge those who are suffering with something we can't see and don't understand, to instead ask questions and try to understand. If you believe someone is struggling, ask them how they are and really mean it. And if they're Minnesota nice responsive, good. Doesn't feel good enough, ask them again. Ask them for their brutal honesty. And be patient. Don't try to solve the problem, but just be there time and again, even when it gets hard. Don't react, respond. Give helpful advice, but know you can't force someone into something they aren't ready for. If you believe someone is struggling, invite them out for a walk or a run. Exercise is the most underutilized antidepressant available to us, and it's free. And listen. I know it sounds so simple, but one of the best things you can do for someone who is struggling is to just be there time and again and let them know you are there to listen. Mental illness is on the rise. We want things to be black and white, but the world is color, technicolor in fact. All shades of crazy, brave, bold, beautiful, nuts, and scared. But what if instead of being frightened to admit our faults, we felt free? And what if instead of feeling shame, we felt safe? The stigma around mental illness and those who are living with it needs to end today, because trying to be strong is killing us.